Okay, good morning everyone, and welcome to the University of Calgary and the Schulz School of Engineering. Thank you so much for joining us for today's joint announcement by the Government of Alberta and the Emissions Reduction Alberta. My name is Anders Nygren. I am the Dean of the Schulz School of Engineering. Before we get started, I wanted to just take a quick moment to acknowledge the traditional territories that we're on, the territories of the peoples of Treaty 7 here in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising the Siksika, the Piikani, and the Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, including Chiniki, Bears Paw, and Good Stoney First Nations. The City of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Districts 5 and 6. So it's our pleasure to have you here at the University of Calgary for today's announcement. Our university is the top provider of energy sector graduates in Canada, and we've taken our commitment to this further with the relaunch of our oil and gas engineering undergraduate program, which is now available to students entering their second year of studies. From the well to the consumer, we have hundreds of scholars across many disciplines active in energy research and innovation. And we are Canada's entrepreneurial university. In fact, the University of Calgary has produced over 90 startup companies in the last 5 years, more than any other Canadian university. So we want to thank our partners in industry and in government for supporting our educational and research efforts, and we look forward to continuing our work on delivering safe and secure energy solutions for the world. I would now like to introduce Alberta's Minister of Environment and Protected Areas, Rebecca Schulz, for today's formal announcements.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for hosting us here today. One of the things I have always valued about the University of Calgary is the connections that you have with industry and the business community, and the innovation that comes out of the university is truly exceptional. Alberta is known as a global leader in energy, and thanks in large part to the oil sands. Decades ago, when former Premier Peter Lougheed helped kickstart the oil sands development, he knew that they were one of the greatest natural resources in the world. Today, the world has come to rely on our responsible, reliable, secure, and responsibly produced energy. Since 2012, oil sands production has nearly doubled, while emissions per barrel have declined by 26%. The oil sands are now one of Canada's single biggest economic drivers, employing tens of thousands of men and women and generating billions of dollars in revenue. Of course, that goes to pay for roads, hospitals, and schools across Alberta and, quite frankly, the rest of the country. However, all mines produce tailings, and like many other industries and mines, the oil sands require water. Yet for almost 50 years, oil sands operators have been forced to retain most of the water they use, leading to billions of liters stored largely in tailings ponds. Collecting more and more water with no end in sight is not sustainable. We don't believe it's sustainable, and the companies don't believe it is sustainable. It not only creates environmental and financial liabilities, but it takes water permanently out of the system, preventing it from being used by others who need it. While the industry continues to wait for a treat and release regulation from the federal government, and it will be needed, it is something that every other industry has, we cannot wait to address this issue because there are other things that we can do, especially when it comes to the harder to treat water. Last year, our government launched the Oil Sands Mine Water Steering Committee to help us find an accelerated path forward. The committee met with experts, reviewed thousands of pages of research, and heard from industry, Indigenous communities, and many others. Their first recommendations were released last week, and more will be coming soon. However, one thing was clear. Managing oil sands mine water and tailings ponds is complex, and there isn't one quick, simple solution. To its credit, Alberta's energy sector has embraced this challenge, like many others, head-on. They have developed some of the most efficient and effective processes in the world to manage, recycle, and reduce water use. For example, at Suncor, internal water recycling rates at site have surpassed 90%, saving millions of liters from ending up in a tailings pond. The industry has also invested millions into testing ways to adapt and develop new water treatment technologies to meet the unique needs of the oil sands. But we need to shift this work into overdrive. We need more advanced technologies to help reduce, treat, and manage mine water. That's why we're here today. We're investing $50 million from the industry-led and industry-funded TIER Fund to develop new technologies to stop the cycle of ever-growing tailings ponds. Led by Emissions Reduction Alberta, this new funding will help us develop smarter, safer, and more effective ways to reduce tailings ponds and ultimately reclaim the land. The competition is open to operators of all sizes and technologies at all stages, with a focus on those that can help minimize freshwater use, treat and reclaim processed water, and close sites responsibly. By upgrading our technology, we can help protect communities and the environment downstream, lower cleanup costs, and keep industry globally competitive. This challenge is complex, but the energy sector that put Alberta on the map has never backed down from a challenge. The sector has spent decades leading the charge by pouring ingenuity and expertise into finding efficiencies, developing new technologies, and increasing responsible production. That's why I'm so excited to see the technologies that do exist stepped up to this challenge. This funding will help us find solutions to a decades-old problem while industry keeps doing what they do best, producing the most responsible, affordable, sustainable energy in the world. Thank you, and I will now pass things over to Justin Reamer, CEO of Emissions Reduction Alberta, and he'll give us some details on this upcoming challenge.
Thank you very much, Minister, and thank you everyone for joining us here today. I'm excited to join Minister Schulz to officially launch this $50 million Tailings Technology Challenge. As always, we appreciate your support, Minister. I'm also like to thank our hosts, the University of Calgary. Thank you. I'm excited to be steps away from technology developers advancing made-in-Alberta solutions to reduce emissions and grow the economy, which is our mandate at ERA. We appreciate the work that's done here, and it is integral to our province. Funding calls like this take lots of planning, engagement, and collaboration with our partners in the private and public sector. And as the Government of Alberta's partner in delivering TIER funding, ERA is committed to investing in technologies that make the biggest impact. And today is no exception. Managing tailings and oil sands mining water is one of the most complex environmental challenges facing our province, and one of our top priorities. ERA alone has already invested $70 million to 20 projects in this space. And while the groundwork is in place, it's time to build on it. And that's where this $50 million Tailings Technology Challenge comes in. This is a call designed to fund the scale-up, the piloting, and the real-world deployment of the most promising solutions. A call focused on funding technologies that treat oil sands waste and water more affordably, more effectively, and at scale. A call for technology developers, researchers, and industry leaders with bold ideas and practical solutions. We want to see technologies that reduce the use of fresh water in oil sands operations and support safer ways to manage our water. Technologies that reduce cleanup costs, accelerate land reclamation, and support responsible and cost-effective site closures. So what does this mean? This means new filtration systems and evaporation technologies. It means extracting additional bitumen or valuable materials like titanium. It means managing air pollutants, wetlands, and nature-based solutions. It means better monitoring and measuring of emissions, and it means reducing the volumes of tailings from ongoing mining activities. Successful applicants can receive up to $15 million per project with a minimum funding request of $1 million. It's important to note that ERA's contributions to a single project will be no more than 50%. Like all of our funding, the private sector has to be at the table and always do, often by far more than our minimum requirement. It's exciting because all this work aligns with ERA's mandate, which is to expand to help address water management, soil remediation, and reduce land disturbance and reduce air pollutants. And I'll also add collaboration is key. Applicants are strongly encouraged to partner with Alberta's post-secondary and research institutions, Indigenous communities, and municipalities where appropriate. And applicants will have to demonstrate a strong partnership with an existing oil sands operator in order to be eligible. Through this funding call, we are also strengthening collaboration across the industry by building on successful platforms like COSIA and the Pathways Alliance to share best practices and accelerate solutions. This province is already a global leader in energy innovation, and the Tailings Technology Challenge is about maintaining our leadership, remaining competitive, and tackling the complex problems head-on. It's about supporting our industry and innovation to make a difference. And I look forward to seeing the applications, learning more about what's taking place in the field, and ultimately reconvening at the beginning of next year to announce the successful projects. Thank you. I'll now hand it over to Kendall Dillon.
Good morning, everyone. It's an absolute pleasure to be here this morning with our partners in government and Emissions Reduction Alberta. My name is Kendall Dilling. I'm president of the Pathways Alliance. I'd like to start by extending Pathways appreciation to Minister Schulz for her leadership on this important file, and to Emissions Reduction Alberta for ongoing collaboration. It's so critical with projects like this that industry and government work together. And ERA has consulted with industry early and often throughout the process, bringing us here today, and we recognize and are appreciative of that. It's important to also thank the University of Calgary for hosting us. Of course, academic partnerships are equally critical in advancing the technology solutions faced by industry. It's indeed critical that everything we do is rooted in sound science and education. If you're not yet familiar, Pathways Alliance represents the 6 largest oil sands companies who work together to advance environmental innovation and projects. Canada's Oil Sands Innovation Alliance, or COSIA, is the innovation arm of Pathways. And that's where our member companies have been working together on a number of environmental priority areas, including tailings, since 2012. And today's announcement is really building on that already established base and to further the collaboration between industry, government, and the scientific community. And certainly we recognize the importance of mine closure and tailings management to our stakeholders and to Indigenous communities. Advancing technologies through this funding will add to the knowledge and expertise that we've already developed as an industry in this critical area. Innovation has always played a critical role in the oil sands and will continue to be an area of focus going forward. We are excited to support this initiative, seeking to accelerate technology development in an area that is important to all Albertans. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now move to the question and answer period of this press conference. Media in the room can line up right here.
Hi there, for the Minister, Michael King with Global News. We saw the report from the committee. We also know that we heard from advocacy groups, including Environmental Defense, saying that they're skeptical about underground disposal, which is kind of one of those proposals there, and saying that it's not as safe as the government makes it out to be. What steps are you going to be taking to make sure that if that is one of the processes moving forward, that it is safe for the environment?
Well, first I would say I'm not surprised to hear NGOs that are seeking to shut in and shut down energy production here in Alberta, being critical of technology that has been used for decades in our energy industry. Deep well disposal is being used, it has been used, it is safe, and we know that. There is also extensive regulation around how that occurs, and so I feel pretty confident in that as one of our potential options moving forward. I don't know, Kendall, did you want to add a little bit more about the work industry is already doing on that front?
Yeah, so as the Minister indicated, I mean, deep well disposal is a very commonplace practice in the industry broadly and is highly, highly regulated. And we have experts at the Alberta Energy Regulator that we work with to ensure that not only is it conducted safely, but there's ongoing monitoring to ensure the safety of those operations. And that same lens would be applied to a mine closure context that we're talking about today. And we do already today use deep well disposal for certain fluids in the mine treatment process, and I think there's opportunity to expand that further safely.
Besides today's announcement in terms of funding, is the province going to be going further in terms of maybe limiting fresh water usage for these purposes?
You know, we're having conversations with industry about how best to implement the recommendations of the committee. Industry has been a responsible partner on that front. I think this funding is also going to help kickstart or speed up adoption of some newer technologies that we can make available. But, you know, industry does know that the accumulation of more water, that's one challenge. We don't want to continue to accumulate water, but industry is already already doing a great job of recycling, reusing, and using as little fresh water as possible. But we also want to just reduce the amount of water that are in those tailings ponds and expedite that side of the work as well. So we're working with industry on what that could look like from a policy perspective. But industry has been, I would say, very active in the engagements of the committee and very willing to step up to address this problem in a proactive and positive approach, and we've seen that in other areas. I mean, you know, I talk a lot about our methane emissions reduction. We were able to reduce methane emissions, meet our target of 45%, not with punitive policies and unachievable targets, but by working with industry to see how we could incentivize methane emissions reduction, and that paid off. We were able to meet our target 3 years ahead of schedule, saving industry $600 million than if we had done things the way the federal government wanted to, with a strict punitive policy and cap, if you will. So I'm pretty encouraged by the conversations I've had, not only with Pathways, but with the individual companies as well. And I think the work of the committee is going to be really helpful in moving this forward.
Hi, I just want to get a sense of how big is this problem? Like, how many tailings would there be right now in Alberta?
The province's oil sands tailings pond contain more than 1.4 billion cubic meters of fluid tailing and more than 390 million cubic meters of water. So it is significant, but industry has been doing an exceptional job, as I mentioned, of recycling that water, reusing it in other aspects of their facility, and taking in less fresh water. So those have been some of the things that industry has been doing, especially given they are one of very few industries, if not maybe one of the only industries, that doesn't have an effluent release regulation, which has also been a bit of a challenge. And I don't know, Kendall, did you want to add more to what industry is currently doing on site to manage that?
So thank you for the question. Every operating mine in Alberta, oil sands mine, before it was ever approved, it had to have an approved closure plan as well. And so they're all working with the regulator closely on staying on track on those closure plans. It doesn't seem like it sometimes, but because these are 40, 50, 60-year-long mine plans, we're still relatively early in these projects. And so we're in that stage of accumulating a lot of tailings and fluids that will in due course be reclaimed. And some of the very original ponds have now been reclaimed and returned to a workable landscape. But when you just take a snapshot in time, you sometimes don't have an appreciation for that full multi-decade process that is ongoing. That said, you know, we have to be open-minded as industry to other ways to accelerate that, because we recognize that is a slow process. And I think part of what we're doing here today is to cast a bit broader net. Maybe there's technologies being applied in other industries elsewhere in the world that we're not even aware of, things that we can bring to bear here to speed up that process.
No, thanks, that helps. I was going to ask, actually, on that, you know, if you are doing this work, why do you need this additional help? Like, what are the challenges in trying to reclaim the ponds?
Yeah, so I mean, certainly to your point, I mean, there's an incredible amount of resources, human and financial, that go into managing this tailings and related mine closure issues by the operators already. Numbers that frankly dwarf anything we're talking about here today. But again, I think it's in the spirit of being open to other things that we have maybe not been considering, and accelerating that process that's already underway. But we, I think, have a little bit of humility as industry to recognize that sometimes there are different ways of approaching things that we may not be thinking about, and we're excited to partner with governments to see what we can learn.
And maybe just to add, I mean, I'm sure we could actually provide you with some photos and footage of some reclaimed tailings ponds. I know I've toured some of those facilities in the Fort McMurray area, and so I'm sure industry would be happy to pass that along. And I would also say, early on in my time as minister in this file, the Premier made it very clear that water availability and tailings management, oil sands mine water management, were very important. They were items in my mandate letter, and right away we had a number of technology companies come forward. Many of them are actually here today, which I think is pretty exciting to see. Come forward and say, you know, I think I have a new technology that we could potentially scale up and help accelerate addressing this issue. As you can appreciate, I'm not the person that should be making those decisions, and so I think it was really important that we had the committee who also had regulatory and technical expertise take a look at all of these potential solutions, and now we're encouraging those folks to work with our oil sands companies and start exploring some things that we haven't already, or speed up the adoption of things, maybe partnerships that are already in the works, which I think is pretty exciting.
G'day, Minister. This first one's for you. Emma Graney with the Globe and Mail. When you referenced earlier about this treat and release plan, now that's been in development for over a decade. There has been very little movement on that. A lot of First Nations up around the oil sands have said absolutely not. You're not going to release anything back into the Athabasca. So how are you getting over those hurdles? How are those discussions going? And are we anywhere near any kind of resolution on that?
You know, that's an interesting question. It's one that I had discussed a lot with the former Environment Minister, and despite a lot of areas of disagreement with the former Environment Minister federally, we had some pretty productive conversations about, I would say, some of the positive impacts coming out of the Crown Indigenous Working Group, that there maybe was a shift or a recognition that all of our industries have an effluent release. You know, we even talk about municipal effluent release, and that's a big topic of conversation on our Water Act reviews that are coming up this fall. And so I think exercises like that and making sure that we're hearing community concerns, I do think that that working group played an important role in ensuring that communities' voices were heard. And so, you know, he had indicated at the time that those discussions, you know, might be shifting slowly over time, but I haven't gotten an update from the new federal environment minister on that. But this industry would be an outlier, given that they don't have this effluent release regulation, which then makes it tough for industry to test out new technology when they're not certain as to what level they have to treat the water to. And so, like I said, we do this in a number of other industries. We do it for municipalities and municipal effluent so that that water can then be released into environment, obviously safely, or reused for other purposes. And those are things we're going to be looking at too.
Thanks. And then my follow-up might be for Kendall, I'm not really sure, but in the recommendations that were made to government about tailings and how we manage them and how they're treated, et cetera, I think there was something about kind of sharing things between different sites and therefore reusing less water to begin with. How realistic are those kinds of recommendations, given that they are separate companies doing separate things with a whole bunch of separate dollars?
Yeah, so obviously those recommendations are kind of hot off the press, and we're digging into them and reviewing them. I think directionally we're very encouraged with where the committee is going in terms of an all-the-above approach, right? You know, clearly water release has to be a critical component to the solution set, but we understand that it can't be the only one. Things like sharing water between operators and using less water in the first place and diverting clean water that just falls in the form of rain that ends up in a tailings pond and then we have to treat and manage. There's all those kind of elements that are equally important. So we're very much viewing this as there's a basket of technologies and tools, that being potentially one that we'll explore. But, you know, your point is not wrong by any means, that there are some technical challenges associated with that, but hey, that we have to be open to everything.
I would just add that practice is already happening somewhat within industry, but one of the things that came up through the work of the committee that we could do more from a regulatory perspective in enabling more of that to happen. And so the timeline that I'll be giving to the AER in my department is over the next 6 to 12 months. I'd like their recommendations on what regulations need to change, what are the barriers. It's similar, quite frankly, to what we're hearing in the overall water availability conversation as well, that in some ways our own regulations are a disincentive to reusing water. I mean, we hear that when it comes to fracking, for example. There are things that we can address around, especially the transportation of that water, ensuring the safe transportation of that water to better enable this to happen.
Out of fairness, we're just going to go to the phones and we're going to come back into the room just to ensure that they can get a question. Operator, you can put the first caller through.
We have a question from Catherine Bukowski from Alberta today. Your line is open.
Oh, thanks. thanks. My questions are along a similar line. So there's some of this technology that's moving up to scale, and we already have rules for things like injection. But what sort of parameters will be in place for some of these technologies that don't really exist yet? Like what sort of regulation is there going to be for something that's at the proof of concept stage?
I actually think if you're talking about the specific competition and what that's going to look like in terms of what we fund, I'll hand that over to Justin so he can kind of talk about what we're going to be looking for from a competition and application perspective. Is that all right, Justin?
So we do want to establish a broad array of criteria for applications. As mentioned, things like water treatment, the ways to mitigate tailings from already current production, the ability to extract minerals, the ability to more effectively monitor and measure emissions coming from the tailings are all eligible for this particular competition. All of those projects that are being proposed, if I understand the question correctly, will have to be permitted under current regulatory structures and rules. And so we'll be making sure we're coherent with government and regulators' direction. And the partnership with the oil sands operators will be critical to ensuring, and they're the best to know and understand what rules they need to operate within, that any of these technology demonstrations will be consistent with the current regulatory environment.
For the consultation process on this competition, what is the consultation process with Indigenous communities on specifically for this competition?
So ERA has engaged a number of Indigenous individuals who have expertise in this area to help design the competition. There will be Indigenous representation on the evaluation committee for when the projects come forward. We're in discussions with the local community as well. Each of the technology providers and the oil sands operators proposing a project will obviously be required in their own way to engage with the respective Indigenous partners as it relates to any implications on that community for a demonstration or trial. So much of this is led by the proponent, but ERA is ensuring we have expertise at the Indigenous level to make sure that filter, that lens is coming into the evaluation and the awarding of funding on various projects.
I know we are over time, but we're going to go to one more question.
Can I just add to that? We've met with a number of Indigenous communities as well over the last number of months. There's been a lot of, I would say, questions and anticipation for the work that this committee is doing, questions around how the work this committee has done aligns with what we heard from the Crown Indigenous Working Group, and those types of questions. And so I think what we're hearing so far is a willingness from Indigenous communities to be part of it, but also ensure that the proponents are doing their duty to consult through those projects. So I think there's a lot of excitement over this. And again, I think that communities having involvement directly in the projects and on the selection committee is going to help with that as well.
We've spoken a lot about mitigation in terms of water being recycled by these companies and obviously mitigating contributions to tailing ponds. I'm curious what the province's sort of benchmarks are around final reclamation and if there are any goals or targets the province is attempting to hit and how much of this funding Albertans can expect to contribute to that final goal.
Yeah, I would say, as Kendall mentioned earlier, all of these projects, all of these oil sands mine projects were required at the beginning of the project to have a plan for reclamation. We also have a mine financial security program where companies put away dollars that then go to ensure that reclamation can happen at the end of project life. And so this is just helping us with one aspect. Quite frankly, these dollars are somewhat small if you compare it to the overall amount of money that will be in the Mine Financial Security Program and the amount of money that the oil sands operators are already investing into oil sands mine water management. But it really does help to kickstart some of that new technology. A lot of the work Emissions Reduction Alberta does is taking new technology and encouraging it to get to scale and adoption. And so we're pretty excited to see what might come out of this.
Thank you, everyone. That's all the time we have today. Have a wonderful day.